This is Lama Tantrapa. Welcome to the Secrets of Qigong Masters, the talk show brought to you by Academy of Qidao, the first and only school in the world offering professional education in Tai Chi and Qigong coaching. To find out about the programs offered at Academy of Qidao and to learn how you too can become a certified Tai Chi or Qigong coach, please go to qigongcoaching.com. The show is also brought to you by Mastery Magazine, sponsoring the Summit of Qigong Masters, bringing together some of the top experts in Qigong in North America. To enjoy watching video interviews with them, please go to qigongmasters.com. Today, I am thrilled to introduce to you Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who was born in 1934 in Italy and now Croatia to Hungarian parents. After World War II, he moved to the United States, where he studied psychology and continued to teach psychology and created a positive psychology movement. Hope to have you on our show, Professor, and I would love to continue our discussion about the flow of the book and the principle that you authored many years ago. The flow is something that can be understood from many different perspectives. Can you share with us a little bit about your understanding of what flow means to you?
Yeah, well, it depends how far back you would like to go and how detailed, because there's, I think, a long story behind the whole thing. But let me just say that, I was a small boy growing up during World War II, and by the end of the war, the country I was from, which was Hungary, was all in shambles, and collapse of the world that I knew as a child suggested to me that something was very wrong with the way humans use their gifts, their brain and culture they had created in the past. And now we are living in a world based on greed and corruption and many other qualities that also are part of the human heritage. And I became interested, how can we avoid the dark side of human nature. I didn't learn anything about that in school, so I looked into old texts and became interested in various religions, spent a long time in India learning yoga, and I didn't find any great epiphany reading religions, many small ones, but no real great ones. So I was still looking, and then kind of by chance I happened to go to a lecture at the university, and the person there was a psychologist. I didn't know that such people existed. I didn't know there was psychology at the time, but he had a story about the darker side of human nature, and it was a very interesting lecture. And so I started reading the books by this guy who was Carl Jung, who had been one of Freud's star disciples, but then broke away. So I came to the United States. I went to the university. Unfortunately, psychology at the time was very behaviorist psychology. And that didn't really appeal to me at all, because I thought that it did differentiate between what was important and what was trivial in everyday life. And I learned enough to get a PhD. And I did my dissertation on something that was close to my interest and was still acceptable by the psychology of the time, which was the study of creativity. Luckily, at Chicago, there was one of the foremost writers on that topic, Jacob Gonzalez, and he shepherded me through to a dissertation there. And in that dissertation, I was studying artists and trying to figure out how they painters their ideas and how they develop their ideas when they paint on a white canvas and end up with a interesting painting. So there were many interesting things that I wrote about, but there was one thing that impressed me most about the artist, which I didn't write at that time because it would have been kind of heresy or anathema to write about it, was the fact that these young people would get lost in their work for 10 hours, 12 hours without eating, barely running to the bathroom and coming back, and they just wanted to work on this canvas so much But once they finished it, they took the canvas and put it against the wall. They didn't expect to sell them because they had no gallery contracts or anything, so they didn't sell the painting. And that was kind of the opposite of what the psychology of the time thought, which was that, we behave in order to achieve a reward, a goal that we want to achieve, and once we achieved it, that makes us feel good about having done this. And
so they were in the flow. The artists were really enjoying the process more so than attached to the goal or destination.
Exactly. But remember that at that time, there was no flow. In other words, nobody had that concept. And as I say, it would have been rather controversial to say that people enjoyed the process. There were a few psychologists who were nibbling at that idea, like Abraham Maslow, but he didn't make it a major part of his psychology. So the idea that the process could be rewarded within certain dimensions that seems to be there in art. And then when I saw it with artists, I started looking at it with other people like sportsmen, music performers, or
dancers.
Dancers, yes, rock climbers, people who were doing something that took a lot of effort, a lot of commitment, and did not produce anything very tangible, either in terms of an object or money or prestige. At first, I thought that each one of these activities had its own kind of reward built in, that people wanted to do it. But then it turned out that if you asked a musician why enjoyed the music, or a long-distance jumper, or a painter, why they all, when describing what was really enjoyable about what they were doing, came up with very similar accounts. And that's when I suddenly realized that underneath all of these different forms of activity, there was a constant set of experiences that were so enjoyable that people were motivated and driven to try to experience them again. And at first I called that the autotelic experience. Then I decided to make it simple, and so often people use the word flow or being carried away by a current, so I decided to call it flow.
Well, in English there is also an expression to go with the flow, which is not exactly the same as being in the flow, but I see some correlations between the two.
Yeah. And that was a term used in some subcultures in California, but I was still in the Midwest, and I don't think I came across that in the early 70s. So anyway, you're right. It is a very graphic and easy to grasp concept of flowing with what you're doing. People would say, "Oh yeah, I know what you mean, what you're talking about."
Well, let me ask you about the meaning of the flow. Is the flow universal flow, or is this specific to each individual? Are we talking about the flow like in Taoism? There's the Tao, the flow of things, as it were? Or are we talking about each person basically has his or her own flow that they would either be struggling against or they would be in the flow?
Yeah, I think that the experience is more like the Tao, in the sense that the way humans are put together, anatomically, biologically, when they are operating at their fullest extent with great concentration, they do feel the same type of experience, but it's more individual in the sense of what makes you so engaged. For some people it may be music, for some people it's the use of the body in a certain way, but even a long-distance runner gets the flow differently from a sprinter.
Right.
So there are many ways of accessing this experience, of getting into it, and that depends on how you are made, in a sense. What nervous system recognizes as an interesting stimulus, and then what you learn about it, how to use whatever talents you are born with. And if as a child you are encouraged to explore what you can do for its own sake, then it's easier to get into flow later on, I think.
Well, it's interesting that there are different ways of entering the state of flow, as you mentioned. And perhaps some of these ways are more effective than others. What would you say about the most effective ways that you are familiar with for people to enter the flow state?
Yeah, I think it's true that over time there have been developed techniques for entering flow, and these were developed mainly in the East and India and China and so forth.
Well, in my experience, one of the easiest ways to experience flow is to look for the edge of my comfort zone, whether it is a comfort zone in regard to physical experience, for example, flexibility-wise, or strength-wise, or ability to perform certain physical movements or tasks, or it may be mental edge of the comfort zone, meaning, for example, feeling adequate to meet certain challenge, and at the same time not overwhelmed by the challenge, but not underwhelmed, meaning that the challenge is less than my skill set. And so I developed the ability to be in flow by observing the edges of my comfort zone and spending more time on the edge. Does this sound like something similar to what you've been exploring and experiencing in the study of flow? I wonder if being in flow also means feeling the energy flowing through your body. If we feel the flow of energy flowing through the body as a life force, or in Qigong it's referred to as Qi, focusing attention on that flow can easily bring us into the state of being in flow. And perhaps also observing the flow allows us to experience life more fully.
I use the notion of psychic energy because everything requires attention, in a sense, whether you are talking to a child or driving a car or cooking a meal or whatever. Energy is the process by which work is done, and humans achieve goals by investing energy, investing attention in them, and that gives attention the role of energy, in a sense, the medium through which we make things happen. Now, when you invest the attention in the process of attending itself, which is, in a sense, what meditation consists of, you are using the attention to attend to the process by which you make things happen, but you are not making them happen. You are refining your psychic energy by attending to it.
There is a difference between attention and intention. You mentioned that by paying attention, we're not trying to change anything, as opposed to intention, which implies that we're not fully accepting or fully okay with it.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, it's attention increase in the ability of using your psychic energy to flow. The brain uses dopamine differently from when you just enjoy something without getting involved in the challenge, skill, balance. So that has a particular neurological effect. Nobody knows that except a few neurologists who have studied this.
It's very important to know this, because if we don't understand that distinction between attention as opposed to intention, then we often develop intentions which are essentially based on acceptance of the present, what we experience, and trying to change it according to what we think is right. And of course, if that goal is not achieved, we will not be happy. And often life just doesn't meet our expectations, so essentially it's an easy way to set ourselves for unhappiness or disappointment.
Right. Yeah, that's right. The most radical way of avoiding that, of course, is the Wu way. But at this point, the neurological knowledge doesn't add much. It just confirms that, yes, there is something happening there, but it doesn't tell you how to achieve flow that's constructive in the sense of increasing your skills or making other people happier.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it fair to say that when the person doesn't have very highly developed skill level, they still can experience flow as long as they focus on the edge of their comfort zone? So when their skill set is met by the level of challenge, then they're neither overwhelmed nor underwhelmed, so they can operate in this flow state as long as they stay on this edge. And then by doing that, they actually build greater skill set.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the virtuous spiral that goes up, increases your skills and allows you to take on increasingly more challenging. Yeah, that would be the ideal.
So would you share with us a bit about the connection between the flow state and creativity? I know that you wrote about both of these subjects, and perhaps there is a good connection between them.
It's not a symmetrical relationship. In other words, in my experience, if you have creativity, you also probably have flow. But it doesn't work the opposite way. You can get flow from activities which are not creative. Could be destructive, could be ritual activities, could be even very simple. I mean, we found people that worked on the assembly line, turning the same nut on the assembly line 42 times each minute, and yet they were able to structure in their mind what they were doing in a way that they seemed to experience flow. Try to do it better and better, and just as a runner may want to shave off a second or two from his record in the mile, the assembly liner may decide to try to beat his own record or to do it with less effort. So you can find the challenges, the opportunities for developing skill in almost everything. And
well, it's interesting that people can experience being in the flow, doing some relatively repetitive routine, but probably they are not doing this repetitive motions in the exact same way over and over again. Probably as they experience the flow, there is something that's also changing. As they say, change is the most constant thing in the universe. And so probably there's something changing in the environment or in the way they're doing whatever they're doing on the conveyor belt or running as runners. And perhaps just the way that they move their feet or other parts of the body is also an expression of creativity.
Yeah, well, if the creativity comes in two forms, the small C creativity and the large C creativity. And the difference between them is really that the small C is something that nobody else notices, and it may improve your life and may help you get into flow, but it doesn't go beyond that. And the large C is the recognition by others that you have achieved something unusual and that the process to get it is different. I mean, the small C and big C may require the same amount of individual creativity, but if you don't have the right audience, for instance, where people think that turning a screw on an assembly line cannot be creative and there's no way, your discovery will go ahead.
But by creativity with a capital C, you mean creativity that is recognized by others, that is valued by other people, perhaps allows you to influence people in some other ways, or perhaps just makes you money.
Yeah. I mean, that's the creativity that everybody would like to have, and that's why it's so popular and a topic, creativity. But from a scientific point of view, it is much easier to study because it's a public event or process, and you can ask now, why did this person get so much fame and this person didn't, and what's the difference between them, and you find the difference is usually either a domain of work in which the contribution was made, that one is more highly praised by society, held in higher esteem, and that's why it's recognized, or because the novelty that the person introduced fell on very fertile ground, so to speak. That is, the people recognize the potential and say, yes, this is how we should do it. But it's not that one inventor is necessarily more creative than the other in his thinking. So creativity is not an individual process, but the individual is part of a social, cultural milieu in which the creativity can flourish or not.
And of course, we know many examples of painters and artists of different disciplines, and as well as inventors, who were not recognized during their lifetime. But then later, perhaps years or decades or even centuries later, they were recognized as geniuses, and their inventions or art was highly praised.
Yeah, and that usually happens when the society has caught up with the understanding of the artist or the scientist, and then they recognize, so that's what he was doing. That's what he was trying to express, and then posthumously the person becomes a big C creator. But unfortunately, you would have to be able to understand what happens in the mind of a person to decide whether his thoughts are creative or not. So we have to rely on the effect on the social environment and say, this person has something to say that people would appreciate. But for that reason, I would say that flow is always experienced, either big C or small C creativity. But it doesn't mean that flow can cause big C creativity. It's a necessary condition, I think, because people who don't like what they're doing won't persevere in the face of too many obstacles, and they say, the hell with it, I will do something else. So you have to enjoy it to keep doing it. In that sense, flow, I think, is a prerequisite.
Would it be fair to say that the person who is intrinsically motivated rather than motivated by extrinsic motivation factors would be doing what he believes is important, not what others think that is important?
Yeah.
We often hear this expression that somebody is ahead of his time. So in a sense, during that person's lifetime, his inventions or his art wasn't recognized as valuable, but then the flow of times caught up, so to speak. The zeitgeist caught up with invention. For instance, we can talk about Nikola Tesla. His inventions were not recognized as valuable during his lifetime, but now we all consider those a great accomplishment. So what we do is we basically see how a person who's ahead of his time is not exactly in the flow of this flow of time, basically the zeitgeist. Would it be fair to say that most inventors would like to be in the flow of the time so they don't have to die to be recognized as geniuses? I
would be surprised if that was not the case. I think they are humans and they would like to see their work recognized and appreciated. And the thing is that this flow of time is not something that is necessarily an organic development that can be predicted. Sometimes the flow of time goes in a negative direction. And for instance, I mean, if you think about the art of Van Gogh, as you know, Van Gogh never sold the painting except to his brother once, and nobody was interested in his paintings. Now they fetch millions of dollars. I mean,
exactly.
So what's the difference? And I think it's quite clear to me that the difference is that he was painting before World War I, where Europe was feeling very comfortable and secure in having achieved a great stage of ever-expanding civilization. And he painted, he probably was kind of somewhat pathologically disturbed, but in any case, his paintings were kind of hallucinatory kind of things that at the time people thought that he must be just untrained or crazy or childish or whatever. Compared to the high art of painting had achieved by then, and very smooth, very elegant, very well defined.
Right.
Then you have World War I, and in a period of a few years, millions of young people get killed for no apparent reason except the kind of stubbornness of the rulers who send them to battle. People suddenly realize that, hey, wait a minute, we are not at the pinnacle of evolution, we are crazy. And at that point, in the whole culture of Europe, people started appreciating African art, all kinds of primitive, the painting of the children, the painting of crazy people, because to them that was more in sync with what they had experienced or they heard about in terms of World War I. So they saw these artists as visionaries before they were considered children or crazy, but now people say they had seen these things before they happened. They understood that we were on the brink of this kind of catastrophe. So in that sense, the society caught up with the artists, but in a funny way, because I don't think Van Gogh wanted to do those things, to have his paintings illustrate the kind of explosive, primitive forces in human psyche. He saw things that way, and he liked to paint them that way. And probably what he was painting, it's not a vision of a catastrophe, it was just a personal preference for bright yellows and reds and waving shapes and so forth.
Right, and Van Gogh obviously was not Salvador Dali, who was much more prominently kind of featuring the artistic expression of human suffering and chaos that he experienced in his lifetime, and probably also that was coming up in the upcoming years. And what happened is that probably people who go through serious trauma in their lives or suffering, and obviously war is one of the major examples of suffering, experience altered states of consciousness. Not quite like psychedelic states, but still very altered states. And if masses of people went through a war and experienced altered states as a result of that, they will have different appreciation of art that is also presenting certain altered states of consciousness on the canvas.
Yeah, so it's interesting and complicated process, but
a question that I would like to wrap up our interview today with, and this is about your practical suggestions, how to experience flow more often for the listeners of our show. How can the listeners of our show can experience flow more often? Do you have any practical examples or suggestions?
Yeah, I think the best way to start with, I think, is to pay attention to what you do for a week, and maybe at the end of each day, maybe you could scribble down what was the high point of your day and what were the times in your day that you really felt badly about your life and about yourself. And do that for a week or as long as you can take it, maybe 2 weeks. And then look over, sit down, create a space for yourself, take a cup of whatever, tea or something harder if you need, and look over what you have written and try to find out whether you see any pattern in it, any things that jumps up 2 or 3 times during the week. You really felt good, and what you were doing was similar. These 3 times were similar in some respect, either where you were, who you were with, what you were doing, something about them was similar. And then you ask yourself, why can't I do that more often? And try to look at the things that were the worst in your week and say, why can't I do this less often? And begin to approach your own life as an artist would approach a block of marble if he wants to do a sculpture. That is, you take out all those parts that don't look like what you want in the sculpture. There's this old Indian saying about the young sculptor who goes to a famous sculptor and say, "Oh, master, I would like to be your apprentice and become a sculptor myself." And the master says, "Oh, well, so what would you like to sculpt?" And the young apprentice says, "Well, more than anything else, I would like to be able to sculpt an elephant." So the master picks up a big chunk of stone and puts it in front of the apprentice and gives him a chisel and a hammer and say, "Okay, here is the stone. Here are your tools. Now take away everything from the stone that doesn't look like an elephant."
Mm-hmm.
That is what I think we should do too. It's a good advice. In other words, look at your life, see what is really not what you would like, that something that makes you feel bad and tired of living and whatever, and take that to say, how can I do without that, or how can I change that somehow? And if you take it away, how can you put instead the things that you really enjoy doing? I'm saying this because we have a method for studying what people do all day long by sending electronic messages at random moments, and people respond and describe how they feel at that moment. And the thing is that most people don't really know what causes positive flow, good moods, rather than complete flow, but even little pieces of flow. They are often very surprised at the end of the week to see, oh, look, I had no idea that when I am talking too much, and then I really feel very positive on so many dimensions, or that when I go out in the backyard and take care of the flowers, I feel at peace with myself. And if that's what's happening, it seems obvious that you should say, how can I do more of that? Or if not exactly the same, but something similar to those activities.
Would it be fair to say that if you want to experience flow, it would be helpful to focus on things that you resonate with personally, as opposed to focusing on those things that you don't resonate with, which cause you discomfort or pain or suffering.
Yeah, that's the beginning. That can be the eventual, also the end, the solution, because once you start doing that, you realize that you are in control of where you invest your psychic energy. And if you learn that, then you can discover new things to do that you enjoy, and yeah, that's it.
Well, so this is a very sane way to live your life, isn't it? By focusing attention on the causes of certain experiences that bring forth the experience that you want, you facilitate more of those experiences, and basically you understand then the cause and effect connection. So you do more of those things that lead to the experiences that you want.
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting that, say, engineers who understand exactly the cause and effect in the bridge they build, how much tension and how much weight and how much the bridge should bear, and they are very precise and very cautious about not overloading or not under-structuring the bridge and so forth. Mm-hmm. But in their own life, they think that it should just go on by itself. You don't have to worry about it. Life is what it is, and you just can blame others if it doesn't work well, or you can blame destiny or whatever. But it never occurs to them that the same idea that makes a bridge stand up, the same process is what makes your life stand up.
And if you engage in the process of engineering your life in a very sane and very clear manner, then it's also something that gives you the sense of being in charge of your life. Isn't it very empowering?
Yeah, exactly. It's empowering because you are actually doing it. So you are demonstrating that you can get, and that is empowering, yes.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Professor. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. You've been listening to the interview with Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the founder of Positive Psychology, on the talk show The Secrets of Qigong Masters. The show is brought to you by Academy of Qidao, the first and only school in the world offering professional education in Tai Chi and Qigong coaching. To find out about the programs offered by Academy of Qidao and how you too can become a certified Tai Chi or Qigong coach, please visit qigongcoaching.com. This show is also brought to you by Mastery Magazine, sponsoring the Summit of Qigong Masters, bringing to you some of the top experts in Qigong in North America. To enjoy watching the interviews with them, please go to qigongmasters.com.